What's up, YouTube? Doomwake here. Today is a very special day, very historic day. We have the long-awaited, and by long-awaited I mean since, last Tuesday? So not that long, but very, very anticipated Banlist announcement. Now, as you can see here, I kind of have it pulled up on screen. We have a lot of changes: historic, pioneer, modern, legacy, vintage. In recent memory, I've been playing this game since 2004, almost 17 years now. I can't really recall a ban list announcement that was this long. I don't know if I ever recall one that has this many cards on it. I'm actually it's actually kind of baffling. Now, obviously, a lot of this has to do with they haven't really made an announcement in quite some time. Mostly, we'll look at it. We'll see in the announcement below. But they kind of stated that during COVID times and with the pandemic, they haven't really made any additional announcements. They kind of want to see let things play out a little bit before they go ahead and make any drastic changes. So that's kind of why we haven't really seen an announcement in quite some time. Well, they've let things play out, and things have been playing out to a spot where people are very unhappy with the modern format. And there's been a lot of complaints and backlash on Twitter about certain cards and strategies that are legal in certain formats. So this is kind of the day of reckoning, if you will. This is the day that they decided to sort of start fresh. I really haven't seen anything like this, so we're just going to today we're going to only be really going over the modern portion of it. That is the format I have the most experience with, so I'm not going to really comment on historic, pioneer, legacy, or vintage. I have very, very limited exposure to those formats in the past couple of months. So while I assume that these are mostly good for the format, until I really start playing those formats more, I'm not really going to go ahead and make assumptions on information that I don't really have. So we're going to be really focusing on modern today. So let's just go ahead and get started. Before we do continue, I just want to say, if you enjoy this type of content, be sure to drop a like on the video, and if you consider subscribing to the channel, it really helps out the video and the channel overall. It doesn't cost you anything, so go ahead and drop a like and subscribe. But moving on to modern. So as you can see here, we have a total of 5 cards that are banned and removed from the format entirely. We have Field of the Dead, Mystic Sanctuary, Simeon Spirit Guide, Tybalt's Trickery, Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath. Now, for those of you that have been playing Modern over the past, we're gonna basically for a little bit, we're just going to forget about call time for a second, right? This is just Modern from, we'll say, August, September to around January, right? That 4 or 5 month period pre-call time, because call time kind of messed everything up. But for those of you who have been playing a lot of Modern in that time, Uro has been utterly dominant. It's been by far the best strategy, whether it was Sultai, Teamer, 4-color. It just, the combination of Uro, Field of the Dead, Mystic Sanctuary just gave control and mid-range decks so much inevitability, stapled into cards that are already good. Uro just, I understand that the front half of Uro is not the most flashy card in the world. 3 mana, gain 3 life, draw a card, put a land into play. But in tandem with Mystic Sanctuary and Field of the Dead, it powered out Field of the Dead. It made sure you had enough lands to have enough islands to be able to fetch Mystic Sanctuary to put cards back on top. It also just combined perfectly with Sanctuary because you could play a fetch land, put a card on top, Uro, draw into the card. So just that whole combination of 3 cards just basically took over Modern for the better part of 6, 7, 8 months, something like that. So pre-call time, that was far and away the best thing you could be doing. There wasn't even really that much that could compete with Uro. People tried playing Heliod Company, Prowess, Death Shadow, but none of those decks could realistically compete with the inevitability and power level of the 4-color Omnath deck. So that was definitely a problem and definitely needed to go. I think a lot of people have been sort of looking at Field of the Dead, Mystic Sanctuary, and Uro as kind of the obvious bans. A lot of people really expected those 3 cards to go, me included. and can't say that I'm unhappy to see them go. And then as far as Simeon Spirit Guide, Simeon Spirit Guide's kind of a weird one. Let me just fix this camera a little bit. Simeon Spirit Guide's kind of a weird one. I understand that their philosophy on Modern, at least their initial philosophy when Modern was first created, was that they wanted it to be a turn 4 format. And Simeon Spirit Guide allows strategies and combo decks to power out their, game-ending haymaker before turn 4. That's kind of the premise behind banning it. I do kind of sympathize with specifically Ad Nauseam players. I think that Ad Nauseam is one of the fairest combo decks that has basically ever existed in Modern. I don't think anybody's ever been unhappy when Ad Nauseam is a good deck, and it's not like it's ever really dominant and oppressive. It's not doing anything completely broken. So I kind of sympathize with the Ad Nauseam players, so I am a little bit, sad to see Simeon Spirit Guide and go in that regard. But I understand what they're doing. I do think that, it almost seems like they're kind of thinking ahead, right? So with the Field Sanctuary and Uro ban, that just removes control, not removes, but very, very significantly hampers control decks. So their thinking is that if control decks get weaker, there's less Force of Negations. When there's less Force of Negations, that being Umsal spells and Belchers, go from, being very fringe archetypes because Force of Negation is a card, to how the hell do we interact with this deck, because there's just not really meaningful things that you can do before turn 2 or turn 3. So I understand that's probably what their theory was, is they're kind of looking ahead. They thought that Oops and Belcher might be a bit too problematic for the format, which is why they went ahead and axed Spirit Guide. So I understand it from that regard. And then the other thing is, if you're worried about Oops and Belcher, there's not really one specific card that you can ban to make both strategies weaker, because they utilize very different techniques. The Belcher deck uses fast mana such as Pyretic Ritual, Desperate Ritual, whereas the Oops All Spells deck uses fast mana in Pentad, Prism, and Talisman. And so you can't really ban a piece of fast mana. You can't ban a combo piece because they both use different combo pieces. So the only way to slow down both decks with one banning is Simeon Spirit Guide. So I do kind of understand that way. I do wish there was maybe a way that they could have reworked the rules so that Balustrade Spy, Undercity Informer, and Goblin Char Belcher, when they looked at the DFCs, they would maybe recognize them as lands. But I just think that that's too much of a rabbit hole they have to go down. It's and you have to think about the repercussions of something like that with other older cards. Like, can Primeval Titan go fetch modal double face cards? Can you get it with Sylvan Scrying? There's just way too many things to consider. So I think because of that, and that being out of the question, I understand the Spirit Guide, even though I do sympathize with you Ad Nauseam players out there. I'm sorry. I feel bad, but and then as far as Tybalt's Trickery, I kind of don't even think this deck is really that good. It's kind of like Neoform level, where it's, probably like a 35 to 40% combo deck that gets pretty easily interacted with Force of Negation. Yeah, I mean, I understand that the gameplay is not very fun. Obviously, when you cast a Cascade spell and hit a Tybalt's Trickery, and Emrakul goes in the stack on turn 2, that's not really good gameplay, and I understand that. But if you're banning a card like Tybalt's Trickery, I'm still kind of concerned, or I don't really understand why you wouldn't ban a card like Neoform, because to me the decks are extremely similar. So at least that's my take on that. So I get that Tybalt's Trickery is bad gameplay, but so is Neoform, and they have very similar percentages in terms of how quickly they go off and how consistent they are. So I understand it, but it's also kind of a bit of a question mark in terms of, why is this legal, but why is this banned but Neoform's still legal? Now, granted, Neoform gets a lot worse with the Spirit Guide ban, so would Trickery, even if it was still legal. But yeah, so let's kind of go down here and just kind of, they did a brief summation of each individual card. So as you can see, as in Pioneer, Uro has become a dominant fixture across many of the top modern decks and operates at a power level that makes it difficult for other mid-range and control decks to compete with. To open space in the metagame for a greater variety of mid-range strategies and other slower decks to coexist, we're choosing to ban Uro in Modern as well. Kind of what we already talked about. And that's another problem with Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, is it kind of just homogenizes all of the control and mid-range decks into the same core 24 cards, and there's very, very little differences in the decks, and the gameplay is very repetitive. It's just incredibly boring, and hats off. Completely understand this, man. And then, again, along with Uro, we're also addressing 2 land cards frequently used by rampant control strategies that we feel are decreasing diversity of gameplay patterns, Field and Sanctuary. Both lands create repetitive and non-interactive game states in the late game for relatively low deck building cost. To promote more back-and-forth gameplay and interaction over win conditions, we're choosing to remove them. Again, same thing. A lot of people were talking about they don't necessarily know whether or not Field of the Dead and Sanctuary would have been problems without Uro, and they wanted to see both of those exist in a format without Uro. And my take on that is just get them out of here. We know they've been a problem for God knows how long. I think without Uro, the Primeval Titan decks that have access to Field of the Dead are just far and away the best thing that you can do. So I completely understand banning Field of the Dead. Sanctuary is one where I'm not really sure without Uro and Field if your control deck just has Sanctuary. I'm not certain that it's too good, because the easiest way for the control decks to win with Sanctuary loops was they would have Cryptic Command, Mystic Sanctuary, and Uro, kind of as the trifecta luck, as you will. And they would just, Cryptic, tap your team, bounce my Sanctuary, replay Sanctuary on my turn, put Cryptic on top, attack with Uro, draw the Cryptic, so on and so forth. So without Uro, I'm not certain that Sanctuary is too powerful, but it's just kind of a nuisance. The fact that, if your control deck has 10 fetch lands in your deck, all of a sudden you now have access to 10 copies of Mystical Tutor, which is just kind of absurd. So I completely understand banning it. Better safe than sorry in a situation like that. And then talk a little bit about Simeon. Simeon's a card we've had our eye on for some time as an enabler that speeds up fast combo decks. As the modern card pool has grown, so too has the capability for decks to assemble early game-winning combinations from hand, with some recent examples including Oops All Spells, Charbulger variants, and some builds of the recent Tybalt's Trickery deck, to slow down that category of combo decks as a whole and give opponents more time to set up interactive plays in the early game. Simeon's Spirit Guide is banned. Kind of a little bit what we already talked about. Again, really unfortunate that Adnaz took a hit, because I don't think Adnaz was ever too good for the format. It was always just a playable deck that the Adnaz specialists could always go to, because it was, there were very few formats where Adnaz was unplayable. The deck was always fine. So kind of unfortunate for them, but again, it's just enabling too many broken things. And as more cards get printed, as we saw with Valky, God of Lies, it's just always going to be on the back of everybody's mind, like, oh, what can we do with Simeon Spirit Guide this set? It's, rather just get it out of here before things cascade, pun intended, into another problem. And then they talk a little bit about trickery. Again, I really don't understand this. So they said, while there's been much discussion about new Tybalt's Trickery decks in several formats, we see Modern as the format where those decks are uniquely problematic via Tybalt's Trickery's interaction with Cascade. While the overall win rate of the deck hasn't shown to be problematic, we believe it contributes to non-games that make Modern less fun to play. Agreed. As the goal of this update is to shake up the metagame into a more fun spot, we're concerned that continued metagame presence of Tybalt's Trickery decks would work against that goal. Therefore, we are banning Tybalt's Trickery in Modern. If you read that statement, if you just replace Tybalt's Trickery with Neoform, you could, it's probably the same exact thing. So again, I don't understand not banning Neoform. I get that Neoform is a lot worse without Simeon Spirit Guide, but kind of just the same thing. I also think that Tybalt's Trickery might have been fine without Simeon Spirit Guide, but that's hard to say. Just kind of slowing the deck down a turn and a half, or a turn. But yeah, I don't know. Again, kind of, I just don't really see the difference between that and Neoform, as I've already stated. But I get it. They want fun gameplay, so I completely understand it. And then the one thing that was not on this particular paragraph or summation is the thing that everybody was waiting for: Cascade rules change. Again, as we were talking about modern pre-call time, because the reason that we were talking about modern pre-call time is because post-call time modern was a Tybalt fest. For those of you who haven't seen my last couple of videos, cascading into Valky God of Lies allowed you to cast Tybalt Cosmic Imposter for free. So the new rule, 702.84a, Cascade is a triggered ability that functions only while the spell with Cascade is on the stack. Cascade means when you cast the spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card whose converted mana cost is less than this spell's converted mana cost. You may cast that spell without paying its mana cost if its converted mana cost is less than this spell's converted mana cost. A lot of converted mana cost there. Then put all cards exiled this way that weren't cast on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, new ruling is that when you cast Violent Outburst and you cascade into Valky God of Lies, you may play the Valky God of Lies because it is 2 converted mana cost. However, the back half, Tybalt Cosmic Imposter, has now has 7 converted mana cost, or always has. I guess they just changed the way that the cards interact, which means you can no longer cast it off of a Cascade spell. Obviously, something needed to change. I played the Pizza Queue yesterday. I only played 4 mirror matches. I thought I was going to play more than that. It did end up winning the Pizza Queue, to no one's surprise. Deck was a huge problem. I'm kind of sad to see it go because I did enjoy playing that deck, but definitely needed to go, and I completely understand it. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because that one was pretty obvious. If that didn't happen, Twitter mobs were going to go all over the place. So very, 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 very happy to see that, or sad to see it go, but understandable. So that is pretty much the only things that are going to affect Modern. Now, I just wanted to do a very brief summation after this of where I think Modern is going to go. So I've gone ahead and really essentially deleted my entire collection of decks, and because they were pretty much all Valky decks. And I kind of just have created 4 decks that I think are going to be sort of, at least for me, the starting point of where I want to go in this new format. With Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, Mystic Sanctuary, and Field gone, and that whole 4-color Omnath shell being deleted from the metagame, control decks are going to have to try and play a little bit of a longer game. They're not going to have as much life gain. They're not going to have as much inevitability. So I think that aggressive strategies benefit hugely, specifically Prowess decks. So this is kind of the first deck. It's essentially copy-pasted. I didn't really change many cards from the most recent list that I could find. Very, very good starting point. This deck's always going to be good, and it's very consistent. It's very fast. It's very punishing. And yeah, just blue-red Prowess, very, very good place to start. Not really much to say about this one. I didn't build the sideboards yet for these decks because I wanted to kind of figure out what the metagame's going to be before I build my sideboard. But yeah, I don't really think there's a whole lot that you can say bad about this deck. There's a few flex slots like the Burst Lightnings and the Gut Shots, but everything else pretty straightforward here. Just a whole bunch of 4-ofs, very, very consistent deck. And I think this is going to be certainly tier 1 in the upcoming format. And then the next deck is Green-White Heliod. Now, if Prowess is the quote-unquote best deck, or one of the best decks, a natural predator to Prowess is life gain. And this is far and away the best version of, I think, the best version of the Heliod company deck. Just very, very consistent again. Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl to generate fast mana, power out your very, very powerful 3-drops, Heliod, Ranger Captain, and Spike Feeder. You have Collected Company, which has a plethora of amazing hits. You have Heliod plus Spike Feeder, which is just a 2-card win the game against Blue-Red Prowess. They can't really beat Infinite Life. I personally would start with 4 copies of a React Champion, again, because I think Prowess is going to be such a huge part of the metagame. I've always been a huge proponent of playing 4 Auriac Champion in these decks. I see people playing 2, and I don't really understand that, especially when there's going to be a lot more Prowess going around. Even without Prowess, just the synergy with Heliod Suncrown is just enough for me to always want to play 4 copies, and it's just so hard to kill. Flex slots like Scavenging Ooze, Eladamri's Call, those can be kind of moved around depending on where you want to be. You could add a 22nd land if you wanted more consistency, like a spell land like Gavany Township. But yeah, if Prowess is good, this deck is very good, so definitely a contender. The third deck I wanted to show you is a deck that kind of a pet deck of mine, Rakdos Death Shadow. Another deck that I think is sort of released from jail, if you will. This deck had a very, very tough Uro Omnath matchup and also a very, very tough fast combo matchup. Both of those decks have essentially been deleted from the format, and we're starting back from square one, and I think Death Shadow is going to be in an amazing place. You just remove two of its worst matchups from the format. I think this deck for me is going to be my starting point for sure. I'm going to be playing a lot of this deck on my stream, which I will put a link to in the description below if you want to go check that out, twitch.tv/Doomwake. And yeah, I just think this is going to be very, very good. The only thing is, the Prowess matchup I think is very close in the sense that it's really hard for this deck to remove Stormwing Entity because we have, as you can see, 4 copies of Fatal Push. So it's possible I want to add maybe a third Dismember or another removal spell that kills that, like maybe, as bad as it sounds, maybe a Go for the Throat or something like that. But we'll see, kind of do some testing with this and figure out some of the numbers. But yeah, just a very good deck. I think that previously this deck's sideboard plan was Blood Moon against the 4-color Omnath decks, but given that those are really not going to be a thing anymore, I would go back to Cleansing Wildfire because this deck also, one of this deck's worst matchups outside of Fast Combo and Uro was Tron. I think Tron is a pretty weak matchup, so I'm choosing to include 4 copies of Cleansing Wildfire, at least for the start. That may go down to 3, that may go down to 2, but I want to start with 4 just in case, because I do think that Tron is not the best matchup for this deck, but really, really, really big on this deck, so I would highly recommend this for the upcoming format. And then the last deck is kind of a relic of the past, if you will. This was something that was extremely popular before the Companion's rules change, before Lurrus and all of its pets, all of its friends got nerfed a little bit. And the theory is, you're a Prowess deck, you have Monastery, Swift Spear, Soulscar, Mage Abbot, Carol Keep, but this deck is a lot more dense with removal spells. Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push. In this deck, because you have also Cling to Dust, Unearth, you can play a much better grindy game than all of the other Prowess decks because you have Lurrus, you have Cling, you have Call Against Command, you have Croaxy, you just have all these engines, these late game card advantage engines, and you can just kind of grind out the other Prowess decks. You have clean removal spells, Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt. So I think if Prowess is going to be if Blue-Red and Mono-Red Prowess are going to be the de facto decks that a lot of people gravitate towards, I think that something like this could be very, very good as well. This deck also, I think, is relatively favored against Death Shadow because the Shadow deck has advantages is that it plays bigger threats like Scourge and Shadow in hopes that its opponent cannot remove those. But this deck still has 4 Fatal Push, so you have more late game card advantage engines with the Croaxus and the Cling to Dust, but you also just have more clean removal spells for their bigger threats. So I think this might be a good starting point as well. Not sure about some of the flex slots. This is just kind of a list that I threw together, but just because I wanted to give you guys an idea of something like this that could be very good, and definitely look out for that as well. So yeah, those are the 4 decks that at least I want to personally start with. I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. We're a good timing in. So just wanted to give you an idea of what I think of the ban and restricted list update, where I want to be moving forward post ban and restricted list update, and just kind of my general thoughts on the whole situation. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.